Okay, we seem to be happening. Let me move a few things around here. As always, if you detect any weirdness in the transmission, um, please let me know. If you have any trouble hearing me or seeing me, if it's the fact that you are hearing me and seeing me, that's the problem. I can't help you. Hello, good morning, Wouter. Good morning, Ilva. Good morning, Ronnie and Lisa, my sister-in-law. Hi, sweetie. And Svan and Brandon and Holger and Patrick. And here, I'm waving, Lisa. I'm waving. Hello. Lots of love, sweetie. And Petra and Maria Jose and Don and Christine. And there's Wouter again. So, hello, good morning. Yes, I'm aware that those of you who were on the European side of things have had your daylight savings time. So, I guess it's a 10-hour difference now, right? Something like that. Temporarily, where you're 9 hours, meaning like Germany and places like that, and England was 8, now is 9, I believe. Anyway, if not, don't worry. It's not going to change anything. I'm still going to do exactly what I'm going to do. And if you've gotten here, you've already figured it out. And if you're watching this later on recorded, who the hell cares? It don't really matter much anymore. Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it may be in whatever part of the world. I am Tad Williams, and I am here to read, which is what I've been doing on Sundays for quite a while now. Anyway, so to get you all up to date on what's going on, pretty much of a muchness here. We are all still hanging out. Two of our young ones who were staying somewhere else for a week or so, kind of as a vacation, have returned to the fold. Don't worry, they were staying in a safe, non-pandemic place. And now they're back at home again, and so that's nice. It's good to have them back with us. Not that we were alone here or anything anyway, but we're back up to our human contingent of 6 people. Everybody else, all the 4-footed creatures and the no-footed creatures, like our snake Irwin, are all doing well. My dad, as far as I can tell, continues to improve. It's always a little hard at this point post-operative to figure out what's going on, but your kind words were much appreciated, and he is proceeding towards health. He's left the hospital now, and he's staying at a place to do rehab and stuff like that, where he'll be for a week or two. So that's going on. What else? I'm continuing to do what I'm doing, which is to work. We got to show one of the members of our family who hadn't seen it. We all watched Ed Wood tonight, which is a great favorite for a number of reasons. One of them is just the indomitability of the human spirit, which comes across brilliantly because, of course, for those of you who don't know, Ed Wood, which is a Tim Burton movie with Johnny Depp, Ed Wood is commonly thought of, and certainly before the advent of The Room and Birdemic, was considered to be the worst filmmaker of all time. But the movie doesn't play him so much to make fun of him. So it's always been one of my favorites. I mean, you really, even though he was a terrible filmmaker, and the film makes that very clear, even though his imagination and talent came nowhere near his ambition, you still feel yourself rooting for him. And the scenes between, and most of it is based on real life, the actual life and times of Ed Wood and his strange coterie of admirers and cronies. And the scenes of him and Bela Lugosi, because really he was Bela Lugosi's last friend in the world in the year or two before that actor finally died. Really very touching. So anyway, we watched that movie tonight as a kind of a, like, let's do something since our wandering travelers have returned to us. I'm still working on all the stuff I'm working on. I also spent a lot of time this week doing a project in Stuttgart, which obviously I'm not in Stuttgart, I'm in California, but there is a conference there that has become a lot of it about about virtual reality. And since, for whatever reasons, I am considered to be somebody who knows something about virtual reality, at least in Europe, because, you know, in America, nobody gives a damn about anything. I was participating in that all week, which was lovely, although it did mean I had to get up at some really early hours. So I'm even more, I can't be jet lagged because I haven't been on a jet plane, but I'm even more time lagged than I usually am. So if I start babbling or speaking in tongues or dancing around making monkey noises or something later on, just bear with me. It's been a long week with really weird sleeping hours. So it is now a little past 2 o'clock in the morning, my time here. It is 2:06, and I may actually finish The Heart of What Was Lost tonight. I don't know. Maybe not. It's a longish section, but we will see what we will see. So I'm about to start part 5 of The Heart of What Was Lost. For those of you who have been keeping up in an indeterminate sort of way, I am at the point where the siege of Nakiga has just turned into something strange and very disturbing, in that as they were having a parley out in front, and don't bother to tell me that the camera has sort of gone out of focus, because I've noticed that too. As the thing was the party was the party, I keep saying, as the siege was in its however many weeks, months it had gone on, because of what the Sitha Ayaminu said to his Grimner decided to try to parley, to have a conference with the besieged Norns. And during the course of that, Vieki, who was one of them, was out in front and watching the interaction between General Sunoku, the very impressive and very serious-minded and charismatic general, was basically having a conversation with his Grimner about how, you know, you'll never defeat us, you know, and even if you come in and kill every one of us, you know, we'll kill so many of you, it won't be really a very good time. So anyway, and then just as they're finishing that parley, there's a huge rumbling noise, and the entire front of the mountain of Nakiga, within which the Norn city and civilization exists, the whole front of that mountain basically avalanched and fell down and killed a bunch of people, including General Sunoku, and his Grimner escaped, Vieki escaped, but it came down and it basically covered the gate under hundreds of tons of stone. And the last thing that his Grimner said was basically, you know, the war is over, we'll never be able to clear that, that's the end. So anyway, yeah, why are we still with this weird looking video here? I don't know. It was doing something strange earlier where it went out of focus, but then it came back into focus again. I don't know. While I'm giving that a quick look to see if I can figure out what that might be, I'm just about to start reading. So if you want to go grab some popcorn or something like that, be my guest. Stream setup, graphics, video clipping, no, none of that should be of any use whatsoever. New tip. Drop dead with your new tip. Okay, I've already set that up with my live video. Use the camera. Why is it not using the camera? It was using the camera, and now it stopped using the camera. Okay, don't panic. I'm gonna stop this for just a second, and then, well, no, I don't really want to do that, do I? It's better. I'll just go ahead with what I've got, and I will. We'll just deal with the. I'm trying to read things here at the same time. We'll just deal with it. It's not the same problem I was having before. That was a browser problem. This is just suddenly my camera has just stopped functioning properly, although it looks like it's functioning, and I'm definitely getting video out of it. Why it's suddenly gone to this less resolution, I have no idea. I hate technology. I don't know. Anyway. Currently, you're very out of focus. Yeah, I know. That is so true. Oh, and there it's back again. I have no idea why. Okay. So, whatever. I won't worry about it. If it goes out of focus again, as long as the voice is coming through, nobody really with any sense wants to look at me at this point anyway. So, anyway, so here we are, part 5 of the heart of what was lost. And this section is titled The Long Way Back. The thoroughfares of Nakiga's first tier were hung with snowy mourning banners, and even the poorest of the poor had some white token tied at arm or neck. The general's own sacrifice host formed an honor guard for their fallen leader, lining up along both sides of the glinting passage so that all who came to Blackwater Field to honor her walked between them. Sunoku Seit Ioru's coffin was empty, of course, but the people of Nakiga still turned out in great numbers to bid the beloved warrior farewell. Despite the loss of such a figure, some even sensed an air of triumph to the ceremony. After all, and against all expectations, the mortal siege had ended. The enemy was leaving, and Nakiga still stood. Except for the queen herself and Lord Akinabi, both still under the veil of the Yindra, all the highest nobles of our race attended Sunoku's funeral. Prince Templar Pratiki, of the queen's own Hamaka clan, placed a sacred witchwood crown upon the empty coffin, and the general's commander and relative, High Marshal Muyare Se Iora, honored her with a wreath of yew branches. And, as a further tribute to Sunoku's bravery and the esteem in which she was held by all, High Magister Yarike of the Builders brought his family's greatest heirloom, a jeweled necklace called the Heart of What Was Lost, and placed it beside the other offerings. When the ceremony was ended, the coffin and tributes were carried in a slow march through the crowds and then deposited in the Iora clan vault. In a time of great danger to our race, Sunoku had become the spirit of the Hikadaya. The people would never forget her. From Lady Mega Seitinata, The Order of Chroniclers. Come, husband, why can I not tempt you? The smoked blindfish is exquisite, the best we have had in an age. Even better, it comes from your lake. It is not my lake, Vieki said, but even he thought he sounded unconvincing. Of course it is, Kimabu gestured for one of the new servants to take him the platter. Who else's would it be? One of the strangest and most fortuitous things that had happened when the stones fell and sealed off the gates was that the great throbbing and shifting of the mountain substance had also caused a collapse at the site, deep in the mountain, where Vieki's builder host had begun digging around the forbidden deeps. This great rupture of stone had exposed an entrance into another part of the lower depths, revealing a heretofore unknown lake that had lain hidden in the darkness of Nakiga's roots since time itself began. The new body of water, which had surprised Vieki, named Dark Garden Lake, when he was summoned there by his workers the day after the collapse, proved to be rich with eyeless fish and other edible creatures and mosses, easing at a stroke the city's fears of starvation. Although it seemed certain that public sentiment would rename it Lake Sunoku, in all other ways Vieki had received the credit for the momentous discovery, and if he was uncomfortable with his newfound acclaim, his wife was not. Why will you not eat? She asked. If you will not try the fish, at least have a little porcupine moss. The cook has outdone himself. Porcupine moss was a bristly sort of lichen, hard to find, but when boiled and spiced, it was a favorite of the old noble families. I cannot help thinking it all too convenient, Vieki said. Magister Yarike knows more of the deep spaces than anyone else in Nakiga. He must have known there was a chance we would find a lake there. It is of no matter, said Kimabu in frustration. Yarike favors you, as he should. Despite all your worries, he has now announced to the Maze that you will be his successor as High Magister. Is it so strange or wrong that he might have hoped you would find such a place? Vieki put down his fork with the untasted fish still on it. Forgive me, wife, he said. I am troubled by many things. I am poor company. You are, it is true, she said, but I forgive you. She brightened. Her features might have been those of a girl just emerged into womanhood. My cousin, Jazio, says he thinks the maize will honor you on the Queen's behalf. Think of that. He rose, trying not to seem too hasty, but his stomach had suddenly gone sour, and the smell of the meal was making him queasy. Yes, we are honored, of course, he said, and I am grateful. Please excuse me, my wife. My head is aching, and I feel the need of some air. It was not air he needed, or even freedom of movement. As he paced the streets of the second tier, Viecki knew that what he really needed was certainty, or at least understanding. What he needed was for all his painful, confused thoughts to give him some peace. The Hikedaya of Nakiga had always lived with the shaking and crumbling of the earth. Thus, when the great stones had fallen upon the gates, most of the people had thought it only another example of the mountain's uneasy sleep. But Viecki had been outside the mountain during the first moments, before the others had dragged him through the sally gate. He had seen the twilight suddenly turn black and the sky turn to falling stone. He had seen dozens of Rimmersmen obliterated beneath the tumbling rocks in an instant. He had watched General Sunoku wait calmly for death, then saw her snuffed like a candle. He still awoke several times each night, gasping, trying in vain to shield himself from a thunder shower of stone. But his continuing disquiet was not caused simply by what he had experienced when the mountain fell. What was troubling him far more was Yarike's strange gesture at the general's funeral. Like the rest of the Hikedaya who were present, serfs and nobles, Viecki had applauded Yarike's generous tribute to the fallen warrior, his tomb gift of Clan Kijada's treasured relic, the heart of what was lost. Unlike the others, though, Viecki's approval had not even lasted until the coffin had been slid into its niche. And the more he considered it, the less sense it made, until now the question tormented him all through his waking hours. Why would his master do such a thing? Many of the Hikedaya had genuinely loved and admired Sunoku, but Yarike had not been one of them. If any other high official had spoken of her so slightingly, then put a magnificent and treasured family heirloom, an heirloom of the garden itself, on her coffin, Viecki would have thought it merely cynical, a political gesture to buy favor with the common herd, who had revered the general and almost come to believe that she had fought off the Northmen and saved them single-handedly. But Viecki's master was famous for his dismissal of mere gestures, of his refusal to court popularity by appeasing either the masses or the powerful elite. In any case, Yarike had no need to appease anyone. Even after the great rockfall, the work of the builders during the siege and Viecki's own discovery made the High Magister nearly unassailable. So why should Lord Yarike do such a strange thing? Why had Viecki's unsentimental old master felt moved enough to seal away his family's greatest prize in someone else's grave? At a moment when his own fortunes were at their height, the puzzle of it would not let him be. And so, churning inside, Viecki walked the dark streets, barely seeing the other nobles when they saluted him, or the servants and low-caste workers who scurried out of his path. I have been the besieger and also the besieged, as Grimner said as he sipped his bowl of ale. But I have never seen anything as damnably strange as this. He was sitting on a wooden chest in front of his tent, while his carles cooked supper over the fire. The skies had cleared, and despite the afternoon shadow of the mountain stretching over the valley, it was not terribly cold. Slutig, still done up in his furs, held out his own bowl to be refilled. Rocks fall, Slutig said, even mountains. God has his own plans. It is not that. As Grimner wiped his lips with the back of his hand, it's knowing that the white foxes are still there. It's as if they went into a house and closed the door and shuttered the windows, leaving us to stand helplessly in the street. The murdering creatures are there, only a few steps from us, but we can do nothing. If I had twice the number of men, it still would take me half a year or more to clear all that stone. Sludig shrugged. Let the fairies starve in their hole, my lord. We can't get in, but they can't get out either. They will not stay in there forever, said his Grimner. I cannot believe they will be unable to find their way out again. They tunnel like moles, those Norns. Then we will come back and finish the job, said Sludig, and drank deeply. As Grimner watched his men beginning the long process of breaking down the camp and preparing for the trip north, for the trip south. They were in no hurry, nor should they be. Many of the wounded were still too weak to walk, and it would be a long march home to Rimmersgard, even farther for most of the mercenary troops. He thought for a moment of the tall fellow he had knighted for helping kill a giant. Nabanai, wasn't he? Or Perdruines? Something southern. That one likely wouldn't reach home until Aidentide, poor devil. But perhaps his new rank would help speed his way. Did we give those fellows who killed the giant anything? Some gold? I will see to it, my lord. Sludig stretched. But not being a knight myself, I don't know exactly how much to give them. His Grimner showed him a sour grin. You need not fear I'll forget your long, hard service, Sludig. In any case, you will be recognized and rewarded by the king and queen, too. So these men, reward them well. It takes courage as well as luck to kill one of those monsters. Courage is always in supply, Sludig said. Luck, not so often. So let's offer our thanks to the mountain for coming down on our enemies. The good Lord alone knows how many men we would have lost if we'd had to take the city inside it. Shall we drink to the mountain? That seems strange, somehow. His Grimner looked up at the great jagged cone. Steam and smoke still wreathed its upper reaches, as if to show that no matter what had happened, a scattering of stones here or there, the great peak still remained above such mundane things as even a war between mortals and fairies. Why not? Sludig waved his bowl for more, and one of the carles dutifully came forward with the jug. We have drunk to defeated enemies before this, if they were brave or noble. The mountain ended the war, and because of that, many of our men will see their homes and families again. That strikes me as noble enough to warrant a salute. He lifted his bowl. To the mountain! Long may she keep her secrets hidden from God-fearing men. Long may she keep the Norns out of the light and away from our lands. Yes, I can drink to that, my friend, said his Grimner as he lifted his own. To the mountain and to the end of killing. And to all our brave dead. His Grimner, thinking of Izorn, his son, suddenly could not find words and only nodded. When they finished their toast, Sludig sat silently, regarding the shadow-darkened peak. At any rate, he said suddenly, now perhaps we can put our swords away for a time. The war is over. The Storm King and the Norns have been destroyed or driven back into the darkness. He looked at the Duke, slightly shamefaced. In truth, I think I would like to buy a farm. His Grimner laughed so hard he spilled the last of his ale. By the ransomer, I wager that never in 1,000 years will such a thing come to pass. My brave, bloody-handed Sludig turned farmer. But thank you for amusing me when I thought I was beyond it. Sludig smiled. Perhaps it will not happen, my lord. I have been wrong ere now, and changed my mind 100 times about other things. But at this moment, after all we've seen and done, I think it would be nice to watch things grow. The Order of Builders had repair work underway almost everywhere in Nakiga. With his noble blood, rank, and especially his new importance, it was easy for Viecki to go where he pleased, see what he wished, and ask whatever questions he wanted. But the thing he was seeking did not appear on any of the official schemes, so it took him some time before he tracked down the gang chief who had led the small crew. The chief, a slender older Hikedaya, with hands so callous they were yellow, led Viecki into the highest tunnels behind the mountain's face, far above most of the work that had been done to shore up the gates and defend the heights of Nakiga, to a place many hundreds of cubits above the starting point of the rock fall. Here it is, my lord host foreman, said the underling. The work was done in the very first days of the siege and then abandoned. Viecki looked around. The natural cavern had been hastily and crudely enlarged, but that was not what caught his attention. A row of a dozen or more tunnels had been gouged in the cavern's rough floor nearest the outside of the mountain, each tunnel as wide as Viecki's waist. Somewhat strangely, the rough chamber had its own well. Where does this water come from? He asked, looking down into the blackness. He dropped a pebble, heard it splash not far below. From one of the meltwater rivulets that run down from the peak, the chief told him. All thanks to the garden, the mountain itself makes certain we will never die of thirst. And what was the purpose of your task here? What need was this digging so high above the gates meant to serve? We were never told, Lord Viecki. Finished with his inspection of the well, he examined the crude tunnels that had been sunk into the cavern floor. Their endings were beyond what he could see with his torch, but they seemed unexceptional. When he had first discovered a passing mention of this place in the Order's records chamber, Viecki had felt sure he had found something important. But now that he was here, it was hard to see it as anything more than another abandoned project from the confusion of the siege's early days. Do you know who ended the digging here? The gang foreman looked at him in surprise. Underlings were seldom told much about their work, and they almost never ever asked. No, host foreman, but the High Magister himself came to see it in the beginning. Perhaps he was displeased with the location chosen. So Yarike had been here to inspect the digging. And did he say anything about the project being abandoned? Again, the look of incomprehension. No, Lord, the order came to us some 8 or 9 bells later. There was much to do, and it was a muddled time. I am sorry, I cannot tell you more. Viecki nodded. No matter. I'm only correcting some of our records back at the Order House. Your assistance has been appreciated. The gang chief looked cautiously pleased, but still maintained his stance of extreme humility. It is an honor to serve you, Lord Viecki, he said. Everyone knows that you saved our people from starvation. He waved his hand, dismissing the praise. The spirit of the garden was watching out for us all. As he followed his guide back down the steep tunnels to the lower levels of the works, he felt compelled to ask, did anyone visit this site during the last days of the siege, after the work was abandoned? I don't think so, Lord Viecki. Why would they? Of course, Viecki said. Why indeed? The temple bells rang to mark the passage of the days, and the life of Nakiga continued as it had since the siege's end, the city both mourning its dead and rejoicing at its unexpected salvation. But Viecki found he could not do either with any comfort. The questions of what had happened before the collapse of the mountainside still worried at his thoughts like a canker. Even his wife, Kimabu, who was otherwise very contented with the state of affairs, noticed his distraction. It would be one thing if you mourned the dead properly, dressing in white and paying the priests for bells to be rung on feast days, she told him. But instead you go about with a long face and your robes covered in dust like a common laborer. My family wonders what is wrong with you, and so do I. But on the few occasions he tried to explain, she did not want to hear. Why would you act this way? Can you not understand that we have been very fortunate? Why would you wish to trouble your people who have had enough of suffering with questions about something that is over and done with? Thus, when Viecki discovered several more similarly abandoned projects above the failure line of the collapse, each one with its own well, all strung along the face of the mountain like gems on a necklace, he told no one. There was only one he wished to speak with about it, in any case, and Viecki was not quite ready for that conversation. We come now to the end of this particular tale of the Wars of Return, and to a necessary apology from your chronicler. Because these words were written less than half a great year after the events described, and because your scribe lived through the siege of the city and felt the mountain fall, it has been more difficult than usual to keep this chronicler's flawed perception from affecting the proper recounting of fact. The only true history is that which has survived for generations and provided edification to our people. History that gives us an understanding of the past, which holds firmly to the eternal truths of who we are, the undeniable truths of our martyrs, our sacred home, and our beloved monarch. But since Queen Utuku slept the Ketayindra throughout the siege, and even as of this writing, has still not returned to us from her healing exile on the road of dreams, this telling of our history can only be flawed and incomplete, full of the errors that come when one humble chronicler tries to tell the tale without the necessary perspective of time and the corrections of her superiors. Still, it was this scribe's duty to do so, and she performed it as best she could. A great tragedy in the South was nearly followed by an even greater tragedy, the loss of our longtime home and the destruction of our people. But by the virtues of the nobles of our most important orders, the sacrifices, the singers, and the builders, we survived. A lesson is here for all. Do not trust in what seem to be the truths of the moment. Put your faith instead in the things that are eternal. Love our Queen and love our mountain. Love and remember the garden that was lost, and the song of our race will then find its proper melody. Here this telling ends. The humble chronicler begs pardon for her failings and hopes that her efforts have brought at least something of use to those who read it. Signed, Lady Miga Seit Janata, Order of Chroniclers, in the 8th great year of High Celebrant Zuniyabe, 16th Magister of that order. Viecki's builders were digging out a blocked main tunnel to the outside. As he returned from an inspection of the workers' progress, making his way down a narrow, nameless alley on the main tier of Nakiga, he suddenly felt the hairs on his neck rise. It took a moment longer before he heard the muffled sound of soft boots. Instead of waiting to discover whether any of those coming behind him even approached his own rank, Viecki heeded the warning of his lifted hackles and stepped to the side to allow those behind him to pass. It was a line of singers in robes the color of dried blood, a dozen or more, and the four at the back were carrying a litter. As the procession went by, some silent signal was passed. The litter stopped, and its curtains parted. Viecki could see nothing of the face in the deep-shadowed hood that appeared there, but he knew that unmusical voice the instant he heard it. "Hold there. I see a face I believe I know. Is that Viecki, say Enduya of the Builders?" Surprised and perhaps even a bit frightened at the unexpected recognition, Viecki made all the proper gestures of respect as he bowed low. "It is, great Lord Akinabi, and it is flattering that you remember me. I only heard of your recovery a few bells ago, but I have already lit several candles in the temples in gratitude for your return to us. I'm sure all of Nakiga feels the same." Despite his fear of the powerful Lord of Song, Viecki was not exaggerating. The people of Nakiga might all tremble before the magician, but Akinabi had been a familiar part of all their lives since before any but the queen and a few of her eldest counselors could remember. The news of his reawakening had been greeted by most as a reassuring return to the way things had been. As befitted one of his stature, the great singer gave no sign he had heard the flattering words. "I've been told that Lord Yahariki has named you his successor, host foreman. I hope that when you ascend to Yaharike's title, you will be as cooperative with the important work of our order as your master has been." Without another word or any sort of sign, Akinabi's litter rose back onto the shoulders of his carriers. The hooded procession abruptly moved off down the street, vanishing into the darkness, and leaving Viecki to ponder all the meanings that could lurk in the Lord of Song's words. Cooperative. He hopes I will be as cooperative as Lord Yarike. That innocuous phrase, which ordinarily would have seemed only a bit of obvious politicking, seemed in present circumstances something more sinister. Of course, our orders work together during the siege for the good of all Nakiga, but does Akinabi mean some other cooperation with the Order of Song? Something darker and more secret? After a long day spent breathing stone dust in the sweltering depths of the mountain, Viecki wanted nothing more than to return to his house, to order and quiet. But Akinabi's cryptic words gnawed at him, and he knew rest would be as elusive as it had been for many nights now. The only thing that might quiet his mind was finding answers to the questions that tormented him, though he knew hearing them might destroy his world. But even if he could not put off the confrontation any longer, he still had to return to his house first. He had something there that he needed. "Southerner! Porto! Over here!" It was Kolbjorn, waving from the other side of a group of men hitching oxen to carts. "Hoy! Over here!" the Northman called. Porto went to join him, stepping over the quantities of dung that decorated the muddy road. The wind had a freezing bite to it today, and the drovers and others were struggling to work while keeping their backs to the icy breeze. "I've been looking all over for you," the young Rimmersman said. "One of the Duke's men is waiting for us back at the campfire." Porto pulled his cloak tighter. "Why? By the good God, they're not going to keep us here any longer, are they? I have 500 leagues to ride home. I will be fortunate if I am back before the Elysia Mansa festival." "You'll be fortunate indeed if snakes don't eat you," said Kolbjorn. "I hear the southern lands are fierce with snakes." Porto rolled his eyes. The Rimmersmen all seemed to think he had spent his life in a steaming jungle like the swampy Ran, instead of a perfectly civilized city. Oh, yes, the snakes are common as kittens where I come from. They crawl into your bed at night to stay warm and then lick your nose to wake you when they're hungry. Kolbjorn stared at him for a moment, sensing the other might be having fun at his expense. Well, I'd rather fight giants every day than have those devil's creatures under my feet all the time. Porto laughed. You are a braver man than I, Kolbjorn, but we already knew that. What does the Duke's man want? Ask him. There he stands. The yellow-bearded Rimmersman was the only figure beside the fire, the one they called Sludig Two Axes, one of his Grimnir's fiercest fighters. At the moment he looked distracted, but otherwise approachable. You were looking for me, my lord? Sludig lifted his head. Ah, yes, Porto of Perdruin, am I right? Don't call me my lord. You're a knight, and I'm not. He showed his teeth in a hard grin. Yes, I've been looking for you. The Duke sent this. He lifted his broad hand. It held a purse. When he was sure it was really meant for him, Porto reached out. What is it? He loosened the string and looked inside. Sweet mother of the Adon, this is for me? 3 gold imperators? And look at all this silver. Kolbjorn was smirking. I already got mine. Counted it too. 5 golds worth altogether. But why? Because it is traditional when a man has been knighted that he be given land or wealth, Sludig said, grinning. Duke Grimnir asked me to tell you he is short of land these days, until all the new king and queen's business is dealt with, but he can at least give you something to make your homeward trip a little easier. Do you accept it? Accept it? My wife would skin me if I didn't. Please thank the Duke. He is very generous. More than generous, said Kolbjorn. Was there one for Erling as well, the man who led us? He has had it already, said Sludig. Barely seemed to notice. I have to say, He has had it already, said Sludig. Barely seemed to notice, I have to say. Busy polishing that giant skull. Porto shook his head. He has not been entirely right since the day the mountain fell. Sludig nodded. In truth, none of us have been. Now I must be going. There is much to do before we break camp tomorrow and start back. Before your road parts from ours, Southerner, you and this young Vesta man should come and take a cup with me. Seems a nice enough fellow, Kolbjorn said when Sludig was gone. He strangled one of the white foxes with his bare hands. Did you know that? Porto shrugged. We have all done strange things here at the ends of the earth. How much have we got left? Not that much. The magister's chamber on the highest floor of the order house was chilly, as Yarike always kept it, with a small oil lamp on his table providing the only light and heat. They had been working together for hours, bringing the master lists up to date on the order's many current tasks, but Vieki was so full of disquiet he had spoken very little. You seem remote, Vieki-za, Yarike finally said. You have scarcely attended to a word I've said, forcing me to repeat myself many times. That is not like you. You were always my most eager student. Vieki took a breath, then another. That is because something is troubling me, High Magister. Yarike's sharp eyes watched him closely. Speak, then. I hope it is not that thing we spoke of before. You deserve all that has come to you from finding the hidden lake. It does not harm your fitting modesty. That is not what troubles me now. May I share my thoughts, Master? I think you should. Now that the time had come, he found it hard to speak. The basalt walls of the order house pressed in on him, their great age a silent reproof. How dare he stand beneath that arched ceiling, which had seen hundreds of foremen like Viecki come and go, and harbor such thoughts about a high magister, let alone one who had been so generous to him? He felt he stood on sliding ground, being carried toward a precipice. Better to jump than to fall. I have been thinking about how you showed me the heart of what was lost when you thought you might not survive to return to Nakiga and wished to make certain it would reach your family. That was a great honor, High Magister. I have trusted few who are not my blood as I trust you, Vieki-san. But then you gave your sacred family treasure to be buried with General Sunoku to honor her, putting the happiness of the people above your own desires. Yaruke looked at him evenly, but his tone had a question in it. Yes, that is always a magister's duty. I do my best to understand all your lessons, Master. Because of that, I have been thinking, and I have decided that I need to show you something of my own family heritage. May I? Of course. Viecki withdrew the bundle of cloth from his robe and placed it on the table in front of his master. Then he carefully unwrapped it until the gray thing lay revealed. For long moments, Yaruke only looked down at the witchwood dagger, at its long, thin blade and its pommel in the shape of a flower, the petals made of milky crystal. It is a beautiful thing, the Magister said at last. How old? Nothing like the heart of what was lost, said Viecki. This snow rose dagger did not come from the lost garden, but was made here in this land, in our old city of Kementari, before it fell. It was given to my foreparent, Enduyo, in the era of the fifth celebrant, as a token of gratitude from the queen. In some ways, it was the foundation of our clan. Your foreparent was greatly honored indeed if this gift came from the queen's own hand. May I hold it? Now Yaruke glanced up to meet Viecki's gaze, his questioning look almost aggressive. Viecki spread his hands. Of course, Master. Still cradling it in its wrappings, the Magister tilted the slender blade to study it more carefully in the unsteady lamplight. Dark, thought Viecki. It is always so dark inside the mountain, and inside the hearts of the Hikedaya. For a moment, with the end of all things familiar pressing on his mind and speeding his heart, he again felt himself to be a creature that lived its life in secret, some sightless, burrowing thing of the dark depths. If the race of Hikedaya all died here beneath the mountain, the world outside might never know. Nor care if they did know, except to breathe a sigh of relief, Viecki decided. And in that instant, nothing seemed to matter at all. Not his honor, not his painful, complicated feelings about his master, not his marriage, nor his clan, nor any of the things that he had thought important. Suddenly, he felt too weak to stand. Without asking permission, he let himself sag into the chair opposite his master's seat. Yaruke glanced up briefly from the snow rose dagger, but said nothing. After a moment's more inspection, the Magister held out the knife. Viecki took it back. I seem to remember some controversy surrounding Enduyo, said Yaruke, but I never knew the details. Forgive me, Master, but I don't believe you. Viecki found himself growing bolder, as though he had let go of something that had previously kept him tethered to the unknown, the comfortable. No, I cannot believe one of your wisdom would have offered someone like me the chance to succeed you unless you knew every detail of my ancestry back to the 8 ships. If not all the way back to the garden itself. And the controversy, as you call it, happened during your lifetime, when you were already a young foreman in this order. Surely you remember. After all, it ended my ancestor's life. Yarike actually smiled, a wintry twitch of his thin lips. Ah, but I am old and have much to recall. Perhaps you could remind me, Viekitsa. My ancestor Enduyo of Kementari was an official of the palace, a master cleric. He was ordered by the queen's oathbound to confirm the treachery of 2 Maze Palace clerics with whom he often worked. He had no personal proof of their guilt, but the palace believed them guilty, so he was ordered to testify against them. To refuse would have meant the disgrace and destruction of his entire family. Given no honorable choice, he elected instead to use this dagger and end himself, like so. Vieki pulled his robe aside and let the knife slide forward a little until the tip of the narrow gray blade rested against his chest. Even the clerics he had been ordered to incriminate attended his funeral, out of respect. Of course, they were still found guilty, still went to the executioner. He looked up at his master. So you see, this blade is schooled at solving difficult problems. And actually, even though we're ahead of the hour tonight, I think I'm going to stop there because I'm going to have to either read about 15 or so minutes past, and then I won't be able to finish it tomorrow night when people are going to be waiting to hear it. And then I can start a new one again next week. So apologies for that sudden conclusion. But as usual, I'm sort of making these decisions on the fly. I've got enough left that it would take me about 10 or 15 minutes past the hour. I don't want to do that and then have to start off from scratch tomorrow. So I will go and I will go ahead with that and read tomorrow. So I do have a few extra minutes tonight. So here's one of the things I'm going to suggest, which is since I'm still going to be around for another 5 to 10 minutes, if anybody wants to send me a question on anything, I would be happy to have it, and I would be happy to. Why is that on? Gosh. I would be happy to answer any questions that anybody might want to. Sorry, I'm just reading. Voucher says, there was a local streaming glitch on my phone in which you explain how your father was staying in Rimmersgard. That was confusing. Well, yes, Voucher, that would be definitely confusing if my father was staying in Rimmersgard, since it's an imaginary place. No, he's staying in rehab. That's probably what the confusion was. He's going to what we would call a rehabilitation facility before going home again, so that they can work with him. It was a heart operation, so they're going to be walking him and getting him back into some physical therapy and stuff like that. So his blood pressure would not blood pressure, his circulatory system will have a chance to get used to being exercised under controlled conditions. Anyway, so but anyway, anybody else has any questions, please feel free to send them to me. I would love to actually talk a little bit, having now read back-to-back Tail Chaser Song and almost being finished with The Heart of What Was Lost, which I will finish in the next reading. It's been very interesting to go from my very first book to one of my most recent works, because of course to me, the differences in my writing just stick out very clearly. I mean, I can see a lot of things that are in the early work that was very unformed, or I hadn't thought through how I wanted to approach these yet. One of the interesting things about Tail Chaser Song, actually, is that Tail Chaser Song was bought by Donna Walheim, the very famous American editor, who, among other, edited everybody at some point in his career. And before he founded Daw Books, he was the editor at Ace, which was, the great paperback publisher of science fiction. And so anyway, so Don bought the book, and then right after that, he got very sick for the first time. And he eventually recovered from that, but never really kind of took a full-time role in the company after that. And his daughter, Betsy Walheim, and her business partner, Sheila Gilbert, became the co-publishers, and Don basically retired. And sadly, he was only with us for a couple of years after that. Although Elsie, his wife, stayed on for quite a few years, but she is also gone too. She was very dear to me. But anyway, so what was going on back in those days was that because Don had bought the book, but then got sick, it never got edited. So one of the interesting things about Tail Chaser Song, and one of the things, of course, that I particularly noticed when I was rereading it a few weeks back, is that it was never edited. It never went through a professional editing process. It was typeset and proofread, but it was never edited in the way that all of my books have been since then. So it's just a very, very strange thing to realize. I mean, this was as raw as it could be. This literally was essentially published the way it came out of my typewriter before I ever dreamed that I'd be able to sell it, before I even started to think about selling it. I was just writing it as a project. So to go from that and then read something fairly recent for me, there's a lot of things that stick out. Some good, some bad. Some just plain amusing. And one of the amusing things was that basically almost every trope that I still love, because they're things that work for me personally, almost every trope that is expanded on in my later books is in Tail Chaser Song, and it's certain types of characters, certain types of settings, the tunnels, the this, the that, the hidden cities, in this case it's a city of cats, but and then there's the hidden bad city of the bad evil cats, and blah blah blah. So it's very funny for me to see how much of that stuff was there in embryo already, and how few new ideas I've had since. But also there are all kinds of other things that have changed since then. I've gotten to be a real bugger about consistency of certain kinds of things. And so, for instance, when I'm writing fantasy, and one of the reasons it can be very tiring writing certain kinds of things, when I'm writing fantasy now, I am very careful not to use any language or phrases or anything that are obviously not of a pre-industrial era. So you never say something like something electrified somebody. Now you can say shock, because shock was a word that existed before the concept of an electrical shock. An electrical shock is just, an adjective tacked on to shock. But other words like electric itself just don't feel right to me now in any kind of pre-industrial setting, even just as an adjective. So now I'm a stickler for that. But as I was because I don't want to kick the reader out. I don't want the reader to have a moment of going, even if they don't notice it always. Sometimes readers don't notice these things, but at some level, something happens so that they kind of realize there's something odd about it. And some people like me actually get irritated by being pulled out by an inappropriate word or concept, Now, obviously, we stretch reality a little bit. My characters are far closer in their conversational mode to modern English than actual medieval, like 14th century, since this is what it's kind of similar to, 14th century English. Phraseology is completely different. Even if you could literally understand the words and the accents, the phraseology is very different. And I don't go that far. But I do try to, now I really try to avoid things that at least seem like they would jolt the reader out. Tail Chaser's full of stuff like that. Again, not so much that the readers probably notice it, and I'm sure even this time when I was reading, a lot of people didn't particularly notice or didn't care, but I noticed it all the time. So it's really interesting seeing, your one's own work 30 years apart, and the fact that Tailchaser has been around all that time is wonderful. And I'm not ashamed of it at all. I'm very proud of it as a first book by somebody who had never tried to write a book. And, you know, they're definitely, I think it's still a really good story. And I think there are moments of you know, that really work well in it and stuff like that. Um, but it's inevitable that when one looks at one's own stuff, if you go back far enough, you're going to look at it and go, so it was, but it was also, as I said, it was not, I'm not ashamed of it at all. I'm proud of it as a first book. So it was pretty interesting. Anyway, so the time has now come, and I'm sorry that if the, oh, somebody's talking about the stops on the thing. I'm not sure myself why that's happening. I'm not getting that effect on my end, on mid-sentence or otherwise. I'm not getting any effect on my end that I'm seeing that is telling me that something's going weird. If somebody at some point wants to tell me approximately where in the broadcast there were breaks, I can go back and review the those sections and see if I can find out what's going on. Ronnie said, I often find that fantasy and SF writers use words that have come into English from another language, and it seems out of place. Well, that's one of the things actually about The Lord of the Rings. Again, Tolkien, even more than me, obviously was a bug about language. The man was an Oxford Don and a professional philologist. And as a result, he had very firm ideas about this. So if you look at The Lord of the Rings, he very strongly avoided Latinate constructions. He was trying to summon a picture of a kind of Anglo-Saxon world. And as a result, you'll notice there's very little in the way the kind of, you know, romance terms. When I say romance, for those of you who don't recognize that, that means coming from Rome, from Latin. So a word like excellent, for instance, or you know, any number of sort of scientific or technical words, they almost all come from Greek or Latin, and Tolkien very strongly eschewed those kinds of words and loan words out of France that had come in during the Norman conquest and a lot of things like that, as much as he could. So his books read, once you notice it, you can't help noticing it. Once you know about it, you can't help noticing it, that he very much is avoiding a lot of the Latinisms that have become a very common part of our language now. But Tolkien was really avoiding them. I am more trying to avoid bringing in words that don't, that do exactly what you talked about, that seem out of place. Even if I don't think that the readers necessarily are going to know why the word would be out of place, I know, and it bugs me if it's there, and I figure at least some of them are like that. Patrick says, have you ever thought about writing a real science fiction story, not like Otherland because it's an in-between? I have actually, and that was, if you remember when I read the short story, or if you heard the short story called And Ministers of Grace, the idea for that was going to be, if I ever get around to it, a novel called Arjuna, is supposed to be much more straight science fiction in the sense that, you know, unlike Otherland, where it's kind of fantasy because of all the virtual worlds, it would be much more what we would call a hard science fiction, or, you know, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So, yeah. As far as what I'm going to read after I finish this, somebody else asked. I have no idea because I have to think about it. And that's one of the reasons I'm stalling by ending I stalled by ending the reading a few minutes early tonight, because I'm going to want a chance to think about it when I finish the story off, before I finish the story off tomorrow, because I probably won't have enough to go through even, it'll probably be half an hour or less of reading of Heart of What Was Lost when I do my next reading. So I'll probably have to think of something else like a short story to read. And since it's Halloween, maybe I'll read one of my, or it's, you know, Halloween month, maybe I'll read one of my less pleasant stories. That might be a possibility too. Anyway, so I think we have at least we've gone well past 3 o'clock my time. And so I am going to say, and oh, by the way, Wouter, I did see what you said, and I'm going to leave it running tonight. I'll just mute my microphone. But So I wanted to say, again, thank you very, very much for joining me. It's a great pleasure. Thank you for putting up with all the strangeness and confusion of me trying to work my way through these things when there are problems. We are pretty much we are a mom and pop operation. So basically, if there's a problem around here, Deb and I have to solve it because nobody else is going to solve it for us. Uh, And so it is occasionally a bit frustrating, I'm sure. But I appreciate your patience. And again, I will say, as I oftentimes do, take good care of yourselves, take good care of your loved ones and your friends and neighbors and the other human beings that you run into. And we will all continue to take care of each other. And in the long run, that is how we are going to make everything work out. Because human beings are social animals. And so it's very important to stay connected to all of us, to stay connected to each other and to not lose faith in whatever you need to have faith in. For me, it's that human beings are pretty good at solving problems and we're getting better slowly, slowly, slowly as a species. That's my faith. So with that, I will leave you and thank you once more for joining me, and I will say goodnight and talk to you all very soon. Okay, thank you. Bye.